few people had asked or suggested that we take a look back at our March Madness bracket. Once the whole thing was over, of course, we still have the Final Four and the championship this weekend. But spoiler alert, those do not matter for this video and this bracket. If you haven't seen our bracket selection picks video and you want to know how we landed on these teams, I'll have it linked down in the description box. But by this channel standards, this is going to be a more chill video. We're just going to sit down and see how wrong we were about our bracket. I'm not quite sure how points work for this bracket, but we landed on a major 29 points and 65 upset points, which brings us to an overall rank of 2,757,110. So, you know what? We cracked the 3 million. And maybe for next year's video, we can aim to rank in the 2.5 or even maybe the 2 million rank. So let me know in the comments what you think we should aim for next year. And by the way, with the NBA and NHL playoffs coming up really soon, like I think in 2 weeks, really soon, maybe less than that, we will have some brackets and some predictions for those that will be much more based on fact and knowledge. But I had so much fun making this last video. It's one of the more fun videos I've made. And so yeah, let's see how far off we were. And I think I've mentioned this, but yeah, we're just gonna sit, look at the bracket. It's gonna really be a really low-key video. So let's start in the East. And we had UConn versus Stetson. And we selected UConn, which, thank goodness, the 91-52 win over Stetson, and they moved on to the second round. Now, things quickly started going wrong for us. The next matchup was FAU versus Northwestern. It was a pretty decisive win, 12 points for Northwestern, so they moved on to face UConn. Now before we look at the second round, let's go down and finish the first round for the East. So San Diego State versus UAB. We selected right on that one. And then we had Auburn and Yale. And I think this is one of the bigger upsets that we got right. So make a note here. The number 4 Auburn over, or I should say the number 13 Yale over the number 4 Auburn, to make, I think, one of our few correct matchups for the next round. Then we had picked BYU 6 seed. They lost to, what I want to pronounce it, Duquesne, only based on French, but that's probably wrong. BYU ended up losing by 4 points. And then Illinois, who we picked to win the whole thing, at least they won in the first round against the 14 seed Morehead State, 85-69. And then we had Washington State versus Drake. We picked Washington State, and that was correct. 66-61. Let's move down a little bit. Iowa State, the number 2 seed. Fortunately, we had to pick South Dakota State, and that was almost a 20-point win on that one. It was never going to be South Dakota, was it? So Iowa State moved on to play against Washington State, and now maybe we can stay in the East and look at the second round. So in the second round, we had UConn up against Northwestern, and we were never going to get this one right because we had FAU to win that matchup. Of course, UConn will probably win the whole tournament if they won against Northwestern. Still, though, really doing good in this one section of the bracket because between San Diego State and Yale, we had San Diego State, and they won 85-57, so a huge win. I mean, Yale was an upset, so that's kind of what you expect to see. So San Diego State moved on to play against UConn. Now elsewhere we had the team I'm calling Duquesne against Illinois, and here again, thank God we stuck with Illinois for a little bit because they moved on. They won 89-63. And finally, for the second round in the East, it was between Washington State and Iowa State. So another one we were never going to get right because our pick was for South Dakota State to win this matchup. Iowa State ended up winning and moving forward. Now back up to UConn and San Diego State. This is where our run with San Diego State ends because of course they lost to UConn 82-52, and Illinois, our big winners, they won, but only slightly, only by a slight margin, to Iowa State 72-69, which brought us to the Elite Eight. In the East, UConn versus Illinois. It was always going to be UConn, and so that's where at least we had one right here in the East for the Elite Eight. Illinois did make it, but they lost pretty dramatically, 25 points. It was a 77-52 loss against UConn. Now, before we get, we'll end up by looking at the Final Four and the championship game, but before we do that, we need to move on to the West. I'm gonna move us over here, and I'm even gonna take a sip of water before we move on. So I think the West might have been our worst conference, our worst division, because, well, let's start at the top. North Carolina versus Wagner. There are some moments in the picks video, in the bracket making video, where something like a 16 seed wins over a number 1 seed, and I think you can physically see the disappointment on my face. And this surely would be one of them. Obviously, UConn won as well, but North Carolina won by almost 30 points over Wagner. And then we had Mississippi State versus Michigan State, and Michigan State won decisively to go on to the second round. Now, St. Mary's and Grand Canyon, this is one of the ones we had right in the West. Grand Canyon won over the number 5 seed St. Mary's, which is still not as big an upset as Yale, seed-wise. So Grand Canyon did move on to the second round, and they were going to face the winners of Alabama and Charleston. We picked Charleston, and Alabama won, and I think this is the first game in the order that we're going that we saw a team break 100 points. Alabama 109, but we have to say, for Charlton's sake, they had 96, so very, very high scoring game. I wonder if this is the highest scoring game of the whole tournament so far on the men's side. I've made a note of that, and we will come back to see if that's the case. Then Clemson versus New Mexico. This was our other correct pick for the West. Clemson won 77 to 56. Baylor versus Colgate. We had picked Colgate. They lost. Baylor moved on. Then we have Dayton versus Nevada. We picked Nevada, and Dayton won by 3 points. And finally, for the West, Arizona versus Long Beach State. Arizona, I'm happy to say, Arizona won by 20 points. So, again, let's look at the second round. North Carolina versus Michigan. We said that Mississippi State, who Michigan played for, or instead of, would win, and in fact, North Carolina won. So that matchup went as poorly as possible. And then same thing here, really. Grand Canyon versus the winner of Alabama versus Charleston. We said Grand Canyon would move forward, but in fact, Alabama did by 11 points. Then further down, we had Clemson versus Baylor, and we thought it was going to be Colgate, and we said Colgate would win, and it was Clemson. So again, as wrong as could be. Not as wrong as the North Carolina one, but still pretty wrong. And then the winner of Dayton versus Arizona was Arizona. So again, we had the right slot. Moving forward, we said it was going to be Long Beach State. It was Arizona. So then between North Carolina and Alabama, of a surprise, maybe. Alabama won 89-87. Really, really tight. And then between Clemson and Arizona, again, we had the right slot, but that's about it. Clemson moved forward. Now, let's see. Are we stuck? Or do I just need to use my right hand? We are stuck. There you go. Okay. Let's go over to the south. So the south went a little bit better than the west. So, between Houston and Longwood, we said Houston would win. And this is another one. Now, let me put this down here, it'll be less noisy. This is another one where I breathed a sigh of relief when we picked Houston to move forward. They won 86-46, so 40-point difference. Let me just run over back to the West here. I want to make sure, looking at 109 and 96 for the highest score. Yeah, comfortably so. So then, looking at Nebraska versus Texas A&M, we had picked Nebraska, and they lost 83, or I should say 98-83 to Texas A&M. So they moved forward to face Houston. Then we've got another thing where the picks work out well for a little bit, because we have Wisconsin versus James Madison. We picked James Madison and it was right. They won 72-61. And then Duke versus Vermont. We picked Duke and that was right. They won 64-47. And then we'll come back to that section. But Texas Tech versus NC State. We picked Texas Tech, and Texas Tech, I think, was going to take us all the way to the championship. But NC State knocked them out real early in the first round. And then Kentucky versus Oakland. That was the other upset that we got right, and that was actually the most dramatic upset, I think. The number 3 seed Kentucky versus the number 14 seed Oakland. And Oakland won 80-76. Yeah, that's the better upset that we predicted. Because Yale was 13. They eliminated a number 4 seed. And Oakland was 14. And they eliminated a number 3 seed. And that leaves us with another just complete flop. Florida versus Colorado, high scoring game, 100-102, which is 202, which is still lower than, oh my god, I gotta do quick math now, 205 from the previous game. And Marquette versus Western Kentucky, we picked, did I say we picked Florida earlier? And Colorado won. And then we picked Western Kentucky, and they lost to Marquette 87-69. Alright, so the next round, Houston versus Texas A&M, which we said was Nebraska. Thankfully though, Houston wins 100-95, And then James Madison versus Duke. Complete blowout. Duke won 93-55. So we got two more right there. We got Houston right and we got Duke right. Then we had NC State versus Oakland. Again, this is where is it a Cinderella story if you just get one upset? This is where Oakland's underdog run ended. They lost to NC State, and between Colorado and Marquette won, which was instead of Western Kentucky, which was our pick. Now, between Houston and Duke, we had picked Duke. No, we hadn't. We had picked Houston. And Duke won. Which I think was a little bit surprising, even if we had not picked our bracket the way we did. And between NC State and Marquette, NC State moved on 67-58 against the number 2 seed Marquette. Face Duke, and then in that match, did we do it? Yeah, I think we did it for the other ones. Between Duke and NC State won, so they are by far the lowest seeded team in the Final Four at number 11. So now let's move on. Let's move down to the Midwest. I think that this is another bad one. This is another bad section of our bracket. Purdue versus Grambling State. And we got Grambling State, which would have been a hell of an upset, but Purdue, as it was written, they won 78-50. Now here's one we got right. Utah State versus TCU, and Utah State won 88-72. Okay, things didn't go too bad in this section, because then we had Gonzaga versus McNeese. And Gonzaga won by 21 points. And then Kansas, which was our selection. And then Kansas versus Stanford. We picked Kansas, and they won 93-89. Then you've got South Carolina versus Oregon. We picked South Carolina, and Oregon won 87-73. Creighton versus Akron. We picked Akron. They lost by 17 points. Thankfully, Texas won against Colorado State, which would be the last correct prediction in the first round for us, because Tennessee versus St. Peter's, another sort of blowout, 34 points ahead for Tennessee to move on to the second round. Now back to the top of the Midwest for the second round, we had Purdue versus Utah State, and either way we had Utah State to move on from that round, and they did not. Purdue won that one 106-67. Never had a chance. But then between Gonzaga and Kansas, again, this is the one saving section for our Midwest. Between Gonzaga and Kansas, we picked Gonzaga, and they did win 89-68. Elsewhere, we had Oregon versus Creighton. Creighton won 86-73. So we did have that slot to win. We did have Akron to win. And then the final nail in the coffin, Texas versus Tennessee. We had picked Texas correctly from the beginning, and we picked them to win in the second round, but unfortunately they lost to Tennessee 62-58. So then, am I all over the place? No, we're still good, because then we have Purdue versus Gonzaga. We had picked Gonzaga to move forward against Utah State, but Purdue were the ones to win 80-68. And then between Creighton and Tennessee, we had Akron to move forward, which would now be Creighton, and that was wrong because Tennessee moved ahead to the Elite Eight to face Purdue. And in that game, Purdue versus Tennessee, I think we had Gonzaga to move all the way, didn't we? Yeah. We had Gonzaga to go to the Final Four, but they were undone by Purdue in the previous round, and sure enough, Purdue won in the Elite Eight as well, 72-66 against Tennessee to go to the Final Four. Okay, so numbers wise, the biggest upset in terms of like seeds was in fact Oakland winning over Kentucky, and then of course there was Yale winning over Auburn, which was another big upset. Both games, I think, were just won by 2 points. Is that correct? Let's see here. No, Oakland won by 4 points. So truly the bigger upset here. Oakland winning over number 3 seed by 4 whole points. And the other sort of stat or number that we got while looking at the bracket is that the highest scoring game, it seems, unless I missed something, it looks like the highest scoring game had a total score of 205, which for college ball I think is very high. Now let's look at the upcoming Final Four when this video comes out. These games are being played tomorrow, and we've got, and this is why I said it doesn't matter for the bracket recap, but the tournament is not done because we had Illinois versus Grand Canyon on the one hand, and in reality it's going to be UConn versus Alabama, and the other semi-final, the other Final Four, we had Texas Tech versus Gonzaga with Texas Tech to win, and in reality it is NC State versus Purdue. Now, and I think, yeah, the championship game, it's not showing up, but we had picked Texas Tech, and then we had picked Illinois to win the whole thing. Given what we have left, well, I don't have a coin to flip this time, but I feel pretty comfortable saying UConn is moving forward to the championship. And it only feels right to say that it's going to be against Purdue, but it does feel like it's going to be, like it could be a tight game depending on how Purdue shows up. We all love an underdog. If anyone watched the latest season of Love is Blind, what was that one kid's name? America loves an underdog. And we do. So, as much as I would love to see NC State, show up and get a Cinderella story, and then we can make a video out of it. And mark my words, if NC State wins March Madness, I will make a video about their March Madness run. So, listen here, NC State, if you want a video made about you, immortalizing your story, your March Madness run in the ASMR sports niche, all you gotta do is win the tournament. It's no big deal. But it seems fair that Purdue are gonna show up and win the Final Four and play against UConn. From the start, you guys were saying UConn. My hair is so big today. It's full of secrets. From the start, you guys were saying that UConn were going to win. And it does seem like that's what we're in for. So if I had to do it all over, and if I had to do it differently, UConn would be the big champions. This has been fun though. Like I said, I will link the selection video, the picks video for this bracket in the description, along with a video I made about Caitlin Clark and all the records that she's been breaking, and the absolute historic run that she's been having. I'm checking something on my phone as we speak. They are playing today at 9:30, so if you're watching this video the day it comes out, the afternoon it comes out, Caitlin Clark is playing against the UConn women's team tonight at 9:30 Eastern. So, go watch that video ahead of that game. For the sake of the storyline, the Caitlin Clark storyline, I want her and her team, Iowa, to win on the women's side. It's looking pretty good for them, but they've had like LSU last game and now UConn today. It's not an easy run in any way. But with that, guys, thank you for hanging out with me. This felt like a really low content video, but it was so much fun to go back and see how off we were. Maybe if you have any ideas for how we could pick our bracket next year, let me know. Also, let me know who you think will win March Madness now that we're very, very close. It's on Monday is the championship game for the men, which is the same day as the eclipse, but I don't think it's going to be affecting the West Coast, like Phoenix. But let me know what you think the matchup is going to be and what you think the final score is going to be. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. And I'm going to be posting a whole bunch next week, so stay tuned for that. I'll see you then.